Okay, so welcome everybody once again to this webinar in which we're going to talk about the Tunisia Renewable Energy Framework. I have been working in renewable energy for more than 10 years now, although I don't like to recognize it, but 10 years. And I have to say that Tunisia has always been one of the most promising countries, at least from the European perspective. And we're happy to see that movement has happened over the past few months. So we're here to analyze what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, and what is going to happen or what will happen in Tunisia in the next few months and years, in particular in renewable energy, solar and wind. We have here with us today a number of experts that are going to be giving us details as to their perspective, and we have it a little bit mixed so that we can learn from different experience. First of all, and I'd like to ask our speakers to please give a little bit of a wave, when your name is called, so that people know who you are. We have Nicolas Fridas from the IFC. Hi, Nicolas. He's obviously going to be talking to us about the point of view of the bank, of the international bank, how they see the risk allocated and how things can be a challenge from the technology and regulatory perspective and how those can be overcome. And we have Federica Baccaro from Enel. Give us a wave, Federica. And she's going to be talking to us about the perspective of the private developer. In this case, Enel is present in many countries, and it's going to be telling us how they've been looking at the development in Tunisia and how they see the country going forward as an opportunity for them and other developers. And we have with us today as well Jean-Pascal Goutin from Eversheds. Jean-Pascal, here we go. And he's going to be telling us about the legal framework and how things are developing going forward. We also have someone with us that wasn't in the original sort of like marketing, but we do have him here with us just helping out Nicolas. And that would be Laurent, who is also present here, and he will be just giving a little bit of support to Nicolas where needed. So first, before we start, and we're going to be hearing from each of the speakers in turn, but before, I'd like to just ask you, who are listening to me, just a quick question just to establish, who is in the room. So please, if I could have just the poll, we have a first poll, and it's very, very simple. It's going to take you literally a few seconds of your time to answer. It's simply, it's very simple. Are you considering investing in renewable energy in Tunisia? So it's either yes or no. So are you considering investing in renewable energy in Tunisia? So, whether it's a tender or it's not a tender, is just very quickly, if you can please just tell me. I'll give you, because it's such a simple question, just 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and let's see the results. And this is just for everybody to know, and also for the speakers. So most people, 58%, are saying yes. They are considering indeed investing. Okay, can we have the second question, please? And the second question speaks in terms of challenges. What are the biggest challenges for you? Whether you're investing or not, you can still understand what are the challenges, so please feel free to answer whether you're investing or not. What is the biggest risk that you can see, or the biggest challenge for you as an investor or a developer? Is it that, there is financial risk and, maybe the banks don't understand the technology that well? Is it a regulatory risk? There are certain things that are out there that you're not really understanding or they're not very clear. Is it technology risk? Is it the fact that, it's a new technology to the country and perhaps that needs to be further researched for you? Or is it other reasons? So I'm just going to give you 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and let's see the response. This is from the people in the room, and quite clearly, it's a big win for regulatory risk. And there's some concern about financial risk, but really is very small in comparison. So now we know who is on the room, so we can close that now. And I'm going to let my colleagues talk. So the way that is going to go is first, Jean-Pascal from Eversheds is going to give us a little bit of a framework of what's happening. Then we're going to hear from Federica on the private developers' point of view. And finally, Nicholas will take stage, telling us a little bit more from the International Finance Corporation. So, Jean-Pascal, go ahead if you want to share the screen and tell us your point of view from Eversheds. That'd be great. We can see the presentation. If you can just make it large for us. And just a note before, and just go to display settings, please, Jean-Pascal, at the top of the screen and press there in display settings for us because we can see it, but it's a little bit small on the screen. Where it says display settings is the second option. So just to let you know, the first one, yeah, the first option. First option, yeah.
Yeah.
The presentations will be made available to everybody. Will be sent to you in the next couple of days with the recording. And you may send us questions in the Q&A box at the bottom, okay? Just like that, Jean-Pascal, your turn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it gives me great pleasure to speak to you all today. I'm Jean-Pascal Boutin, I'm a partner at Eversheds Sutherland. And just before I go into the Tunisian market, just a bit about Eversheds Sutherland. We've advised on over 40 gigawatts of renewable energy projects to date. We have over 150 lawyers specializing in clean energy. And in 2016, we advised on more renewable energy M&A deals than any other law firm. And we've also set up an African network across more than 38 African countries. So just turning more particular about Eversheds Sutherland in relation to Tunisia, we have specialists based in London and Paris, headed by Boris Martor, and we also have an office in Tunis that advise on local regulatory issues. Just to add that Boris Martor and his team in Paris have been advising on the regulations in Tunis for a number of years now. So going to the opportunity and the targets themselves in Tunisia, the published targets are 1 gigawatt by 2020 and 2,500 megawatts by 2025. It covers all the main technologies, but the main ones we're looking at are wind and solar. They've introduced 3 different types of models for schemes in Tunisia. The first was what I would call the producer-consumer structure. So that's where the producer consumes the electricity. People also call that the auto-consumption scheme. Secondly, there's the authorization schemes. And lastly, there's concession schemes. So we've just divided that up in terms of targets by 2020 between solar and wind, between the various different structures. And you'll also see that STEG are planning to procure their own facilities also by 2020. So just expanding on the different types of structures more, looking at the producer-consumer type schemes, that's where the producer for low voltage facilities are able to undertake net metering in relation to their own facilities. And for medium voltage and high voltage, again, there's a net metering facility, but also the generators are entitled to wheel the electricity to other sites. There is a published wheeling charge for that. And this type of structure is restricted to the industry, agricultural and service sector. And they can export up to 30% from their generation output onto the network. Now, we are looking at different models for developer model, and we're exploring that more with STEG in this context. So, as some of you may be aware, there was recently announced a tender for what we call the authorization structure, and the table sets out there the different aggregate capacities for wind and solar, and the maximum individual project sizes for for wind and solar, and the different dates for the tender submissions. In terms of the last type of structure, the concession structure, the details of that are still being developed. It's anticipated that there will be they'll keep it neutral, and there'll be developer sites and also government procured sites. So just going slightly more detail in relation to the current tender, what we call the authorization tender, there are pre-qualification criteria which cover a list of issues, the experience of similar projects, where there'll be a source of finance, how progressed is the developer in relation to the site procurement and documentation, a technical analysis of the site, the extent to which local resources will be used for construction and job creation, and also compliance with standards. Subject to reaching a minimum score of 50 out of 100 in relation to those criteria, then a developer will move to the next criteria, which is essentially where the developer will be judged as regards the tariff offered. They can offer a mixture of tariff in dinar, dollars, or euros, and essentially it's fixed for the first 12 years, and then you can have a separate fixed tariff for the remaining 8 years. And then essentially a bidder will be judged in accordance with the tariff they proposed, in accordance with the formula that's all set out. So just looking at the PPA which has been published for the authorization structure, as it were, the current tender, I've just listed 2 slides very briefly, and later on Niklas will go into these in more detail. But essentially STEG will be the off-taker. It's a 20-year take-or-pay agreement. There's 72 hours of permissible outages for program maintenance, and there's 72 hours of permissible interruptions for non-scheduled maintenance. The exact mechanics for how you get a grid connection and the process for that is not completely clear. Having said that, they have issued the technical requirements for the grid connection. The connection costs will be the developer's responsibility. So looking at some of the key issues that there are under the PPA, and this is something that Boris Martel, myself, and IFC and others have been discussing with the regulatory authority for a certain amount of time now. So the key issues are the fact there's no sovereign guarantee. Changes in shareholding have to be approved by the Ministry of Energy. Above $4 million, disputes are subject to international arbitration, but the seat is in Tunis. There's no compensation for political force majeure events. There's no recognition of political force majeure events. The change in law clause is quite unusual. It says that the ministry will try and seek an exemption from any changes in law having an impact on the project. And there's no specified compensation on termination provisions. So that's a very high-level overview, and now I'll hand over back to Belen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you can just stop sharing the screen so that we can, I'm just going to allow Federica to do her presentation as well, and then we'll take questions and answers. So Federica, if you can unmute yourself and share the screen, that'd be great. Just a reminder, you can send questions and answers. I've seen a couple of you already have with some very specific questions. We should get around to them once the presentations have finished. So yeah, just make that big screen for us and we're ready.
Can you see it? Big? Large enough? Okay, so I will start.
Perfect.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining, and I hope that this webinar will be a good opportunity for all stakeholders and interested parties in sharing our views and probably and hopefully improving ourselves the status of the renewable energy market in Tunisia. What I'm going to provide you today is the standpoint of my company, which is Enel Green Power. Just to give you a few numbers about the reality of Enel Green Power. We are present in 29 countries. We have a strong presence in Africa with actually power plants in South Africa and developing project in Morocco. So we know the Maghreb area quite well. We're talking about 38 gigawatt of capacity installed and in operation, and as well as a pipeline of 3 gigawatts. So we have big numbers in renewable energy projects. We have expertise, and Tunisia is one of the countries we have been actually looking at in the past few years. But still, we have to enter the market. So we are here talking about what can be done and what are the next steps that we see as an IPP. So jumping to the first slide, basically what we know, analyzing what we have learned actually analyzing the Tunisian framework is that the country has all characteristics to be an attractive countries from an EPP standpoint and from our standpoint. So talking about the main criteria that we consider when we evaluate a country. So we have actually long-term target, 30% share RES 2013. We have key regulation in place. We have actually an attractive projection on demand growth rate. And we have a good renewable energy endowment, both in terms of solar radiation and in terms of wind speed. We have also, you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, actually, we have also important targets set by the government, which allow us to have visibility up to 2030. So this is clearly strategic for us to know that the country is committed to renewable energy with a long-term view and not just with a short-term view. That being said, despite these features that not just us, but also very likely other interested investors, potentially interested investors have been evaluated, the capacity did not develop at a significant pace in the past years in Tunisia. So this is quite peculiar. The reason, we will try to analyze the reason in the next slides, basically. Just a question for you. I don't know whether you are familiar to renewable energy regulation in Tunisia, and whether you know when the first piece of regulation on renewable energy was introduced in the country. Well, despite the fact that as I said, the RES development is still going at a very slow pace in the country. The first piece of regulation was put in place more than 20 years ago, in 1995. So it's actually quite interesting. In the next slide, you can see a very detailed slide. Actually, I'm going to try to highlight just the main points on these slides. Basically, you can see a long timeline. So we are talking about 1995 up to 2016. So we are talking about more than 20 years. And as you can see, the Tunisian regulatory institution and legislators have not been sitting on their desk and waiting for things to happen, actually, but have been working on renewable regulation. There were many programs introduced also starting from the early 2000s. Just one and for all, it's the ProSol program introduced in 2005, which was interesting, actually, solar water heaters, and was actually a very good development and success in terms of capacity installed. We have the first renewable energy program in 2008. We have the first targets in 2008. So we are talking about 4% rest of primary energy supply and 10% in total electricity installed capacity by 2011. So in 2008, the country was looking at midterm targets, was talking about concrete objectives, and was actually studying instruments to reach these objectives. The following year, there were program, 2009, I'm talking about 2009, there were program developed for small-scale project. There was actually a very interesting and pioneer law in the region, actually, for the self-consumption of industrial and agricultural entities, which were allowed by the regulatory framework in place to produce renewable energy for their own purpose, for their own consumption. 2010,
I think we lost
Shift.
it. Oh, here we go. No, you're back. You're back. It's okay. Don't worry.
Back?
Yes.
Back? And have you lost many?
I think you started to 2010 and then you went off. So if you can go back to 2010, that'd be great. Thank you.
Back to 2010. So 2010, as I said, the Tunisian solar plan. Sorry, there is something weird.
We can see it well. We can see
okay.
your slide with the regulation.
Yeah. Okay, great. In 2010, the Tunisian government published the Tunisian solar plan, which was a long-term initiative with concrete targets and with concrete projects and programs to implement. The Prosolelec to actually in the same year to boost residential PV development. But again, despite all this initiative, actually the development of renewable energy was lagging behind. So we had to wait 2015. Of course, we know that in 2013 there was the Tunisian revolution. So the political problem did have a weight in this process. This can't be hidden actually. But we had to wait 2015 to see first the first full comprehensive renewable energy law, and to see actually the following year the what is known as Tunisian 2020 program that has finally not just declared target and not just declared ambitions, but has deployed a set of concrete measures. We are talking about the regimes that Jean-Pascal has introduced before, so the concession, the authorization regime, and the self-consumption regime. So we actually had to wait 2016 to see concrete initiative deployed, despite the announcements that the government have been, let's say, making in the previous 20 years, without having this announcement followed by concrete and attractive measures for IPPs. So as you can see, we've been monitoring quite a lot for many years, but it's just after the Tunisia 2020 program that we, as an IPP, decided that it was time to move to enter this country and to start concretely to develop capacity into this country. The message behind this slide is that it doesn't matter for us as an IPP how many targets you have, how many commitments you have, how many documents you can develop concerning your strategy. You need concrete initiative, you need concrete piece of legislations to be put out, and you need to have, let's say, actions following timelines. So following declarations, we need to see that things are moving in the right direction, and we just can't rely on the announcements made by the government. So here we are, 2020 RS programs. This is the instruments and the programs that with them has been finally moving into the right direction for the renewable energy sector in the country. We are talking about very quickly about 4 regimes, let's say 3 regimes, and another potential opportunity which is the capacity that SPEC is going to develop. Our strategy has been to analyze all the possibility and try to understand which is the room, let's say, for participating to all regimes in place, and try to take advantages of all the opportunity available. For the small scale project, for the authorization, we have first problem. So the capacity for the project is capped at 30 megawatts for wind and 10 megawatts for PV. Plus, there is a rule, let's say, or constraints, legislative constraints that doesn't allow investor to bid on more than 1 project per technology. So this is clearly limiting the room for economy of scale when an investor approach, let's say, an opportunity to invest. This is something that we have to deal with, but with him that this is actually what we call a barrier to development. Another problem, my colleague will definitely talk about this much more into detail, is the PPA. It's not bankable. This traduce when you find a bank that is willing to finance it, if you find it, the cost of our debt will be much higher. So this, of course, have consequences on the tariff that we as an IPP can bid. So there is a zero-sum game for everybody. Moving to the large scale, to the concession regime, we don't know much about this regime yet. This is a problem because we have the government announced that we are expecting tender to be called by the end of this year, but we don't have visibility on anything, nor on the rules, nor on the PPAs. We have concern that the PPA will not be bankable either. So we don't know whether the sites will be sites proposed by us or identified by the government. There are rumors, but nothing defined. And the lack of visibility is definitely a barrier for an investor to move into the country. Self-consumption regime. Again, this is let's say a regime that could represent, if we have the legal possibility to do it, which is not the case at the moment, could allow us and other investors to attack a very large and a market with a very large potential. So the market for direct sales to, for, let's say, selling directly the energy to the industrial customers. So somehow opening the production segment of the market also to private IPPs through direct contracts that will configure the direct sales of energy to industrial investors. Apparently, the legislation doesn't allow us to do that, which is a shame because the system will definitely benefit of more competition at the production segment and at the distribution segment. Anyway, so you see, the Tunisian 2020, it's an important step ahead for us, but there are definitely room to improve the situation. On all the opportunities that we have identified, there are definitely margins to significantly improve and make these initiatives more attractive than what they are now for investors like us, like EGP. So let me show you what I'm talking about when I talk about concrete measures to improve the situation. As I said, clearly the recent initiative is a step ahead, but we can't talk about a welcoming investor environment yet. So there are things that we identified as a certain measure to improve the environment and the attractiveness of the Tunisian renewable energy market that can be deployed in the short term, should be deployed in the short term actually, but that will carry along also long-term benefits. Here in this slide, I actually tried to list what I'm talking about. For the authorization regime, very specifically, we need to improve and change the PPA. It's not bankable. This is a problem that has consequences both for the investors and both for the off-taker, which will end up paying a higher tariff than what would be with a PPA, which is fully bankable. We don't like the capacity caps, as again these caps are actually hindering the possibility for investors to bet on a large pipeline of projects to develop in the markets. If you know that you have constraints upfront, that you're not going to be able to develop more than one project or more than a certain size, you know from the beginning that you're not going to be able to do any economy of scales, and this is a problem. Again, with an impact on the capacity of the investors to be competitive. The concession regime, we need visibility in order to mobilize, to invest in projects that we're talking about, 50 megawatt for PV and 100 megawatt for wind. In order to be able to mobilize and to invest in the country, we need to have visibility. We need to know what will going on, what is going to happen, which is going to be the rule of the game, and what we can expect from the PPA. Okay. Again, important for us is also that the government will follow on the current rumors, so that investors will be allowed to propose their sites, since investors might have sites which are very competitive, which are endowed with a very good level of resource. So at the end of the day, there could be private projects more competitive than public projects or projects procured by the government. And this is something that we deem is important to take into account. The auto-consumption regime as again a market that should be untapped, and in order to do that, we need to specifically remove constraints that at the moment do not allow, let's say, the power plants to be owned by a vehicle or any other legal entity which is not the owner and the consumer itself of the energy that is produced. This, of course, limits the possibility for IPPs and for other interested parties which are willing to collaborate with the industrial consumers to participate to this regime. Long-term benefit of all these measures, as I said, economy of scale, competitive contract tariffs, the opening of the production market, basically production, and with benefit that ultimately affects the retail prices, the retail tariffs. And the last point is very important. Once we have visibility as an IPP on what are the concrete possibility that we have to make business in one country, to invest in one country, we usually have long-term commitments to those countries. So we want to hire people, we want to invest, we want to make knowledge transfer, we want to, not just us, there is also panel manufacturer or turbine manufacturers which might be deciding to install a factory there. So, but none of these initiatives, let's say, is going to be feasible without having visibility and without having commitment on the rules and on the timing of the initiatives that are announced by the government. So this is basically all. I hope that was not too long. If yes, please excuse me. And I will leave the floor to Belen.
It wasn't long and it was very interesting. So thank you very much. It's always good to understand, what are the private developers thinking. If you can just stop sharing the screen at the top.
Yeah.
So that we can allow now Nicholas to give us his perspective from the IFC. Nicholas, I see that your microphone is already on, so you just need to share the screen for us. And Laurent is back on the call, so if you have anything, he's paying attention to help you out. You ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you, Belen. Our pleasure also on my turn to be given the opportunity to present IFC's opinion about the developments in Tunisia. So I am now trying to share my screen.
All you have to do is, normally at the bottom there's a little, there we go. Just go to display settings as we did before with.
Yeah. Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Nick Freidas. I am a senior energy specialist in the advisory services of IFC, International Finance Corporation, and together with my colleague, Mr. Laurent Dietrich, who is a consultant, a specialized regulatory and policy consultant, we will present you the IFC's view of the Tunisian renewable energy investment framework. IFC has been quite active in Tunisia. We have done what we believe an exhaustive market and investment framework diagnostics since almost since the beginning of last summer of In June 2016, we have been active. We have committed people not only from the advisory services, but also from investment services and from the World Bank. 2 words about IFC. We are, of course, the private sector development arm of the World Bank Group. We are the world's largest multilateral private sector investor in emerging markets. We have a 60 years history, and we have a total committed investment portfolio of up to 52 billion in our history. Power sector is of particular interest to us. We have realized more than 350 power investment projects around the globe in 65 countries, representing almost 40,000 megawatts of generation capacity. Of our power portfolio, which is about 6 billion invested, 2/3 is the renewable energy. The renewable energy sector accounts for 2/3 of IFC's power portfolio. We have supported investments in wind power in more than 50 wind power projects around the world and 77 solar projects. And of course, we are, as I mentioned, particularly interested in Tunisia to support projects in Tunisia, renewable projects in Tunisia. We are able to provide all kinds of support tools and mobilize also other resources in syndicated financing. We are able to provide equity, we are able to provide senior debt and all other products in between. One little glance on Tunisia power sector. At the moment, as it is, renewables represent not even 3% of the total national production. It is clearly a thermal system. It relies very much into gas and into imported gas from Algeria, and this is a strategic wish of the government and a strategic objective to reduce this reliance on imported natural gas, which is also combined with the fact that Tunisia is experiencing a quite strong growth in demand and particularly in capacity. The average rate of growth of capacity demand is more than the energy demand. And this actually aligns very well with solar generation because PV particularly generation project will be able to compensate as the peak demand is presented during, of course, of hours, mainly because of air conditioning, because during of hours of solar generation production. So for these reasons, Tunisia has implemented, and we applaud this strategy, a program of integrating in their power sector up to 12% of total generation produced by 2020 and up to 30% by 2030 renewable generation. And this is a very ambitious target, for which we need to have the correct framework in order to facilitate and catalyze investments from the private sector. The regimes have already been mentioned and the capacities by the previous speakers, so I will not dwell a lot on these aspects. It has already been described how between the two main technologies, wind and PV solar, these are split, and which are the primary law, the secondary law, the decree, and the implementing text, particularly the manual of procedures and the PPA, and also the grid code, the cahier de charges that you can find on this website. I will concentrate mainly my presentation for the next slides on the authorization process. This is because the authorization process is of immediate interest. As you know, on the 11th of May, the government of Tunisia has made this appel de projet for the first tranche of wind and solar projects with the various capacities that have just been presented. So this is a graphical depiction of the timeline of how this authorization process is going to go. Basically, there is a deadline in November 2017 to submit the dossier by the developers, which have both the technical criteria and qualifications that need to be fulfilled, and of course their price offer. And within 4 months, the technical committee, who is mandated to make the evaluation of the dossiers, will announce the results. So as Jean-Pascal has described earlier, those who have a minimum score in technical, in the technical qualifications and fulfill certain criteria will be then evaluated on the basis of their price offer. And they will receive, the winners will receive a preliminary authorization, which is valid for 24 months in the case of PV projects and 36 months for wind. So they will have this window with this preliminary authorization to move to financial closure and construction, and then will receive, upon certain conditions and inspection by STEG, and of course all the environmental and social impact assessment conditions being placed, they will receive the license, the generation license, and the final authorization, and they will start commercial operation. We see that already there are some issues. Before going to the details of the regulatory tools and instruments, there are some issues which present a risk in this process. One is that this process is based on developers having their own sites. And of course, there might be the case that those sites have to be declassified from agricultural use to industrial use, and maybe the process of this change of classification is not aligned with the tight timeline for this basically tendering process. Another big risk is that after you receive, in case you are a winner, a preliminary authorization and you are declared a winner, you will receive a final connection study from STEG. And then, of course, will be a contract with STEG. But this final connection study might come with a differentiation and a change on connection costs. Obviously, the connection cost, the preliminary connection cost that you have discussed with STEG during the preparation of your dossier would have been passed through to your price offer. However, if those costs are increased post-declaration of the winner, it's not clear how they can be recovered, and it is a clear risk for the developer. As Federica mentioned, we also have found that basically the PPA, which has been discussed actually extensively, is not bankable. It's not bankable according to the standards that international financial institutions are using. And there are many issues that I am going to briefly touch upon. I am also conscious that have been many interesting questions that we would like to address and answer. So we would like to leave some time for question and answers. So I will not dwell too much on those issues, but there are issues of non-bankability on PPA, and there are also issues of uncertainty in the manual of procedure. And it is a bit disappointing, the fact that not only IFC and World Bank Group, but other international financial institutions, EBRD, and other donors have been making comments throughout this process for several months now to the government of Tunisia, And unfortunately, we have not been fully successful in making our comments to go through to the final implementing tools, or the secondary legislation, if you like, documents. But my concluding slide will show that there is still hope, and that those efforts are still continuing. So there is an offtake risk. There are, Jean-Pascal mentioned those 72 hours for force majeure and 72 hours for maintenance. So there is a provision for some time during the year when STEG cannot and is excused of taking the produced energy by the renewable generation installation. However, there are not clear conditions how, if anything further happens from those provisioned hours, how the non-off-taken energy is measured and how is compensated. It is very unclear, and it is, of course, an off-take risk, including the fact that the STEG as a single buyer does also offer a risk or in terms of credit worthiness. I mentioned the risk with regards to increasing of the connection costs, and therefore the price offered in the tender could be inadequate to cover the full costs if the connection costs are increased post the award of the tender. And there is also no guarantee whether there are delays, particularly on behalf of STEG, and there are no provisions of covering this risk of delays of commissioning the connection, and therefore when the generation, the IPP plant is ready to start commercial operation, is not ready to be connected to the system. There is no, I think this has already been mentioned, provision for changes in the law. And there is some mentioning regarding the case of potential extra costs as a result of changes in the law or taxation, but it is not at all clear how those extra costs will be covered and who is going to judge if it is of a significant impact into the feasibility and viability of the project. One, for example, case could change the viability and the feasibility of the project is if the law later on a 20 years term, changes the balancing, the electricity balancing scheme, and those balancing costs hit the renewable producers. Force majeure is defined, but process and provisions for dealing with events are not clearly defined in the manual of procedures. The connection risk has already been mentioned. I have also to say that in the grid code, there is provision for detailed studies regarding the connection, where the developer has to identify also the losses on his connection, although clearly STEG as a single buyer off-takes the energy at the connection point. There is a provision to calculate the losses on the shallow connection, on the line with which this IPP site is connected to the rest of the system. And nowhere in the documentation, in the regulatory documentation, mentions what and who does what with those losses calculated on the shallow connection. Arbitration is to be held in Tunisia under Tunisian law. This obviously presents a risk, and international arbitration is only introduced for a loss of $4 million or above, which is deemed extremely high. Another major issue of risk is that the conditions for changes in equity, transfer of ownership, are particularly strict. One has to apply to the ministry, and with not exactly a clear framework how his petition is judged, in order to change or to make transfers in equity, or to have an exit strategy, as a matter of fact. So in brief, there is a lot of risk and uncertain issues in the Manual of Procedures and the PPA, which have been published together with the Appel de Projet for the authorization process regime. And I am fully in agreement with Federica that international financial institutions deem the PPA at the moment as non-bankable. IFC has also performed a market survey during the last 3 months, and the findings of this market survey, we have asked a variety of players, not only developers, but multinationals, and donors and other players, non-governmental organizations, and their opinion and their comments very much coincide with some of our findings and our diagnostics. That the framework still leaves a lot to be missed, and it needs to be improved. So what is the way forward? This is not a privilege of International Finance Corporation. Other donors and IFIs like EBRD has been trying to assist the government in Tunisia to improve the regulatory framework. There is a big technical assistance capacity building program which have been now set up between the German government and the Tunisian government, which will last 3 years. IFC has signed an MOU with GIZ, which is the German organization who will implement this technical assistance. And we will undertake parts of this program, particularly with regards to assisting STEG with the connections. I've mentioned the connection risk. We are developing a framework which will eliminate all those uncertainties around the connection, the application for connection, and receiving the final offer, and how you deal with the connection costs or the extra connection costs post-tender award. We also assist STEG on the power quality studies and future operational measures that they have dispatched in the dispatching center with regards to integrating larger amounts of renewable and variable generation capacity. And also I think that EBRD will undertake part of this program. So there will be interinstitutional collaboration in helping, improving, and creating new documents for this regulatory framework. On the 20th of July, we have made an appointment, and there will be a workshop with the Ministry of Energy, specifically focused on PPA issues and those non-bankability issues. And we hope that this will lead finally to convincing the government to revisit the PPA, and with the help of the IFIs to have a dedicated support to improve towards PPA, towards bankability standards. Now, we are also conscious that with regards to the deadline of 15th of November, we don't have much time. So it is a really difficult exercise, but we try to make everything possible to have a revised PPA before the submission of the dossiers. So I think I'll stop here, and I hope we have some interesting questions that we can address to our audience.
We do, Nicholas, but it's 12:57, so it's like I'm afraid we've taken the whole time talking, and I haven't wanted to stop you because it was very interesting. But we don't really have much time really for questions and answers now. We've run through the time. There are a number of questions here. You know, most of them are very specific, but I think that perhaps, you know, all of the speakers have been looking at them. Perhaps we can give some final remarks and make sure to keep them short because people probably have meetings to go on to. But Jean-Pascal, why don't you start, your remarks, you've looked at the questions, just some like sort of conclusion, and then we'll let people go.
I think we're all very well aware that the key issue of the Tunisian program is the PPA. I think we all wish the DFI's luck on the workshop. I think we just have to bear in mind we've been having these discussions with STEG for a number of years. I think it will happen. It's just a matter of when. As I said earlier, we're looking at the auto consumption route, i.e. bypassing STEG and going directly with the customer. And that's something we've done in other markets. So that's definitely an area we're going to pursue as well.
Okay, so I'm sorry I have to do this, really, because there's been some really interesting questions. We've been trying to respond to as many as possible by text, but Federica, just your final remarks, your point of view.
Yeah, my point of view here is that PPA is definitely the main problem, a practical main problem, but as a matter of fact, if Tunisian institutions want the experts and global developer to invest in the country, we need to have visibility on the programs, on the dates, on the capacity that will be put on the market. We need to know exactly the terms of the environment in which we are going to move. So I'm also asking I'm also hoping that we will have soon more clarity on the concession regime, as well as the real commitment to the government to collaborate with interested parties to, let's say, revisit the consumption regime in order to allow IPP to enter with a feasible business model.
Excellent. And Nicholas, I know that you've just spoken, but perhaps just some wrapping up thoughts. We have like about half a minute, so you have to keep them short.
PPA clearly is a major issue, and there is a lot of effort focused on improving it, but it's not the only issue. It's an unfortunate thing that Tunisia does not have an independent regulatory agency. This makes the role of STEG, who obviously develops its own also renewable project, some kind of precarious and with conflicts of interest, but it's also a very strong role in determining who will win the project, since it has the connection procedure. So we are trying to help STEG also in both capacity building, but also to have a regime of connection procedures very independent and very robust, on which the costs will be calculated. And the general capacity building is also an issue. The technical committee, how they will evaluate the dossiers. So there is an effort of assisting the government to have a framework that is more complete and with reduced uncertainties.
Well, thank you very much. I think we've all learned a lot today, and we've taken like the best part of an hour, but I think it's been really interesting. I think the bottom line is that everybody in this room, everybody that signed up for this, we're all clear. Renewable energy definitely is the way forward. We know that it can offer the cheapest energy, and it can do it cleanly. So it's a question of all joining forces and using our know-how to try and get that across in every country. In the case of Tunisia, they could really benefit from really cheap renewable energy. So I hope that all working together, we can manage to get to a point in which, we can all benefit from that opportunity. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. We are sorry we didn't get to the Q&A side. We did run a little bit over. Some of the presentations have the email address of the presenters. And before going, I'd like to say thank you to our speakers. To Federica, to Jean-Pascal, to Nicolas, and of course to Laurent, and to everybody that participated. And we hope to see you the next time around. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.